get started. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences. Welcome into the SECU Daily Planet Theater. My name is Chris. I'm your host for the Lunchtime Discovery Series. Sorry, everybody. And I'm here. I get the pleasure and the privilege of welcoming everybody into our museum inside the globe as well for our special lectures. Now, here at the Museum of Natural Sciences, we don't do this program alone. It's actually coordinated and organized by the folks in the Office of Environmental Education within the Department of Environmental Quality. So there you go, two state institutions working together to make cool and interesting things happen for you every single Wednesday at noon. At least once a week, these state agencies are doing their jobs. No, I'm joking. That was just a joke. Nobody laughed, but that's okay. Except the state employees in the room, they did. Well, for today's presentation, everybody, I'm excited to introduce you to Amanda Bratcher. Amanda is actually a friend of the museum and a friend of the lecture series, has been on this program now more than one time, and it's always exciting to hear about the work that they've got going on. So Amanda Bratcher is a horticulture agent with the North Carolina Cooperative Extension, part of the Lee County Center, and I'm excited to hear about this Great Southeast Pollinator Census. I'm guessing they went out and counted every single pollinator? They wish. Well, Amanda wishes. Well, we're going to find out all about it and about the great work that's being done. So everybody put your hands together and welcome Amanda to the stage.
Oh, man. I got to get my my mic face back on. This is so cool. Hi, everybody. Hi, guys. So my name is Amanda Bratcher. I'm the horticulture agent, which means I get to do gardening every day. I get to teach gardening. I get to pull weeds and throw mulch and look at pretty flowers, including some cool stuff that I picked out of the pollinator garden at the extension office before I headed up here. So I am here today, though, to talk about the Great Southeast Pollinator Census and what we've been doing for the last 2 years in North Carolina, and then also how you can do the census this year in your own garden and community. So I am going to start with why you should care about pollinators, because pollinators are everywhere. They really need us to be paying attention to them and what we do every day, and what we do every day impacts them. So we're going to talk a little bit about that, what the Great Southeast Pollinator Census is, a little bit about the history and why it's here, what we do with it, and then how you can participate. So I am from Lee County, and if you've never been to Lee County, I am here right in the center of the state, just southwest of where we're at in Raleigh right now. It's actually a very quick drive, 45-minute drive. And we're almost in the center of the state. We're like 10 miles away from the geographic center. And I'm representing Cooperative Extension. So as an extension agent, I'm extending research-based information from NC State University, NC University, and all of the other land-grant universities across the country to help North Carolinians and other citizens transform science into everyday solutions. So I help everybody from what is this weed in my yard, all the way up to I want to plant some beautiful plants in my garden, all the way to helping farmers understand when they need to plant their crops and what they need to do to be profitable. It's actually a really cool job. I really enjoy it. I also work with the Extension Master Gardener volunteers. We have a small but mighty crew down in Lee County who help manage our pollinator demonstration garden, and they kind of extend what I do out into the community and help me educate folks. This is a picture of our pollinator garden out in Lee County, a very small but mighty garden. It's a little over half an acre if you plugged everything together, and this was what it looked like yesterday, so it's just now waking up. It's right on the edge of a agricultural field, so it's actually kind of interesting to see this pollinator garden right next to an agricultural field. We've been pulling weeds because it's been a really great year for winter weeds, but it's really cool. Over the last 3 years, I've been managing this space after having managed botanical gardens for almost 10 years, and just to see how the garden changes from year to year. So the picture on the left here is what it looked like last year, and the picture on the right is what it looks like yesterday afternoon. So you can already tell things are much more lush, they're bigger, and we're already rocking and rolling. And here's a few things that are flowering. We just have a few flowers. It's been a little cool this year, so we celebrate them when we can see them, which is very cool. So let's start. Why should you care about pollinators? We get really hung up on the honeybee, and I'm not a honeybee basher. I love our honeybees. But there's lots more than honeybees that are pollinators. We've got bats, beetles, flies, moths, butterflies, birds, ants. All of those things pollinate. They move pollen from one plant to another in hopes that there's some sort of reproduction that happens. And through this, the life cycle of plants continues. Sometimes these pollinators get nectar or pollen sources. Sometimes they're just bumbling around. But it is important that they are everywhere. They do a lot of different things. They're not just moving pollen from one plant to the other. Sometimes they are also eating other things. Sometimes they're harvesting other things. So they're really a big, important part of our ecosystem. And I like to remind folks that they are important. When people get really hung up about, oh my goodness, it's a bee and I'm scared of it and it's gonna sting me and I'm gonna die. And no, most of the time bees and other insects are really busy. They don't really need to worry with us. So we really just need to kind of get out of their way and let them do their things. There is a lot of hype around there. You may have seen some of these things. Maybe you have a garden that is a butterfly highway or some other garden certification. You may have heard of the Homegrown National Park. So there's a lot of hype around pollinators, and it ebbs and flows, but what's really important is that we recognize them every year. If it weren't for pollinators, we would definitely not have all the great food that we like to eat. If you like strawberries or blueberries or any kind of berry or fruit, without pollinators, we would not have those. And then the farmers wouldn't have anything to sell, and then they wouldn't have any livelihood. And without them, again, plants wouldn't be able to reproduce. So pollinators are incredibly important. I love gardening for many, many reasons, but one of the reasons I love it is I get to be outside every day. I get to see things grow and change and plants do their thing, but then also we get these beautiful insects and animals that wander through the garden, and it really does give me also some calm and peace as well. So there's a mental health element to it as well. I know there's lots of documentation that shows that whenever people walk out in nature, that they are happier and really enjoy being outside. Pollinators perform what's called an ecosystem service. That's everything that nature does just by being nature. Sometimes we, as humans, we do things that don't help nature do nature things. But this is just the way that ecosystems sustain natural processes that support life. And probably one of the biggest ones that we really like to focus on as humans, because we like to eat things, is pollination. So let's remember our pollinators. Because all of these things together, if it were not for ecosystems just doing their thing without us having to do a bunch of work, we would be really, really in a bad place. And pollinator populations are declining. There's lots of reasons for this. Habitat loss, we cut down forests for building buildings, and we mow things a lot to maintain spaces. Usually if we're doing clear cuts, we don't have any trees or habitat, but also if we cut the flowers and we cut the plants down and they're not able to flower, there's less flowers and other resources available to insects and pollinators to do their thing. We also do tend to overapply pesticides. There is a licensing structure in North Carolina, and when we're talking to folks who are getting their license, we try to inform them like, hey, let's think about why you're applying a pesticide. So in hopes that we're reducing our pesticide use. Also, the climate is changing, and this change does cause stress on the environment. Last year was a really hot and dry, then hot and wet year, and obviously with Hurricane Helene and the other hurricanes impacting our state, all of those things keep just making things kind of seem worse and worse every year. And obviously our hearts go out to our neighbors, but also there's lots of wildlife and nature that was also impacted by those hurricanes, and that's going to have long-lasting implications as well. And finally, parasites, diseases, and invasive species. I know right now honeybee beekeepers are really struggling with varroa mites, and we also have another pest that they're trying to keep out of Southeast Asia that is also going to potentially impact our honeybee populations. And then on top of that, there are invasive species. There's something called the European hornet, which we're going to talk about a little bit, and those are really getting into honeybee hives. There's some other hornets that are really coming down the line. So we're really there's a lot of work to do. The big one that I'd like to really highlight today, or two things I'd like to highlight today, is habitat loss and fragmentation. Here in North Carolina, we've seen an incredible population increase. The chart on the right is really showing that everything, the darker the blue, the greater the population increase. And if the darkest blue is a population increase of 3 to 20% in the last 3 years. So that is really amazing to think. Now, these are people going from rural areas to urban areas, but also people moving to our state, because North Carolina is pretty awesome, let's be real. But that also means that these folks have to have a place to stay. We have to build homes, and a lot of times they end up being subdivisions, and there's certain ways that we think that we have to manage these subdivisions and other spaces. But unfortunately, what we do in these spaces, whether it's subdivision or a commercial property, the trees along the streets, all of those things are still part of the ecosystem. What we do to them or what we don't do to them impacts not only that plant and that ecosystem, but also the pollinators and other animals that interact with it. So we have to remember that everything we do is part of nature and what we do, and there are things that we can change to support pollinators. And in traditional landscapes, unfortunately, we do have they are dominated by non-native, non-ecologically functioning plants. They don't sustain natural communities, and they don't support healthy ecosystems for a lot of host of reasons. And what this does is it creates an ecological imbalance. And a lot of folks, especially folks who tend to love gardening, who tend to love nature, you can bring nature home and recognize nature in your home just by reducing mowing and planting some beautiful plants. Also, reducing pesticide use. There's a lot of pesticides that get used in the landscape. I get a lot of phone calls from folks who are really struggling in their gardens, and they think that they have to spray something, and there's the pesticide is going to be a silver bullet to whatever their issue is. And unfortunately, sometimes I spend a lot of times just educating folks on why what they're experiencing is normal. You know, something is bad is happening to my plant, and most of the time, actually nothing is wrong with their plant. Maybe their plant is undergoing a change, or there's an insect that's suddenly, has emerged from being asleep, and now it's active in your garden or with your plants, and a lot of times these guys will go away in a matter of months and won't be an issue anymore. So I challenge everybody here, if you can do anything, really ask yourself, are these organisms negatively impacting your desirable plants? And really, is it a serious pest problem? And there are certifications that landscapers can get. There are pesticide applicators licensed, and these folks and myself as an extension agent and extension agents across the state, we can help you diagnose issues and help you make management decisions. I also want to educate folks on how pesticides impact pollinators. So pollinators are not just exposed to direct application. Obviously, nobody wants to go out and spray a bunch of bees with some pesticides, but these bees and other insects interact with these plants long after we've walked away with our pesticide spray, and we really need to be thinking about how those pesticides might be impacting our plants. The nesting material and contaminated nesting areas is an area where a lot of citizen science projects are trying to target now, and I'm going to talk about those in a little bit. There are also some pesticide residue concerns coming out of nurseries. So whenever you're purchasing plants, talk with your nursery folks and ask them what pesticides they've treated their plants with, and ask them if they use any pesticides that negatively impact bees. I work with nursery folks all the time, and a lot of times they may not realize that they're using something that can impact their consumer down the line. And so education's a real big part. We can make decisions and make changes to be more positive towards pollinators. So understanding how their life cycle works can really inform management. If you really think about it, it's so cool that we have butterflies and bees. Think of a butterfly, or monarch butterfly. They have a little tiny egg that lands on a plant, or gets laid on a plant, and then a little caterpillar emerges, and that caterpillar eats that plant, and it gets strength and energy, and then it turns into a pupa, or a chrysalis, and then it changes completely and turns and emerges as a butterfly. Like, if you really think about that, that's an incredible life cycle. That's an incredible change to happen. But also think at every single stage, there's something different and maybe dangerous that can happen to that animal. And so there's really quite tenuous as well. So we just try to be mindful of those things. I'm a huge fan of monitoring and scouting. That is like the best skill a gardener can have is observation. Just being able to say, hey, there's something in flower over there. Hey, this thing is suddenly up. Or hey, this thing is being eaten now. What is that thing? Being curious, observing things, that can save you so much time and energy, just making sure that you're keeping an eye on things and not suddenly being surprised. Although I think surprise and serendipity are also kind of part of that beauty. And remember, because we are interconnected with nature, there really is this philosophy, especially within gardens, that if you build it, they will come. The they being nature, insects, animals, plants, whether we like them or not, other things. And so if we can build it, providing that food, water, and shelter basics, they will be there. So where are these pollinators, especially bees, living on your property or in your community? So in this picture on the slide, I've got a picture of a wind chime that was in my garden, and I noticed that there was a grass wasp who built her nest in the little pipe that laid sideways. She did this for 3 years until that wind chime fell apart. But she was there, well, it wasn't her. Her progeny were there every single year building their nest in there. And it was so cool because I knew that summer was finally there when I saw the grass sticking out of the pipe. In the other picture, there is a bumblebee colony that's living in an old bluebird box. And what that bumblebee colony is probably doing is taking the old bird nesting from last year and building their nest amongst it. And I have a video in another presentation I've done, and there was actually about a dozen of them outside of that little hole, buzzing their little wings and providing air conditioning to the inside of the beehive or the bird box. And I think that serendipity is really beautiful, but they live in all sorts of crazy places. Everywhere they can tuck into wherever they're at. So, okay, there's my spiel about pollinators and why they're important. So Q, the Great Southeast Pollinator Census, which is what I really get behind, because even if you're just now starting to notice things in your community or just now maybe starting to garden, this is a great program that you can do, super simple, that you can do in your backyard, you can do with your community, with your school group, with your scout group, whatever group you're with. Doesn't take a lot of knowledge, and it's only 2 days. So you just do it either August 22nd or 23rd of this year, and then you're kind of done, which is kind of cool. So what is the Great Southeast Pollinator Census? It is a citizen science project that does a one-time survey observation of one plant that's in flower. You just count, use a tally mark system to count the types of insects that are landing on that one plant. And this was started by Becky Griffin down at UGA. She was actually working with community gardens. She's the urban community garden specialist for the University of Georgia. She's based out of the mountains of Georgia. And she realized that with these grants that she was getting for her programs and the school gardens and community gardens she was working with, people were so focused on vegetables, and they really didn't think about the flowers and the floral resources in their community or the need for them. And she actually started noticing that some of these gardens weren't producing a lot of fruit. And people were wondering, well, why, Becky? Why are they not producing fruit? And she's like, well, where are the flowers? And they're like, what do you mean, where are the flowers? And she's like, well, you have to have flowers to have pollinators, and you have to bring the pollinators in so they go to the flowers of the vegetables to make the fruit. And people were like, whoa. And when she finally educated them on this and added more floral resources to these gardens like zinnias and salvias and other perennial plants, they suddenly realized, wow, there is an increase of vegetables and fruits that are coming out of our garden. And so she started this in 2017 as a pilot with 50 gardens. And by today, we are in North Carolina, South Carolina, Florida, and Alabama as of this year. So 5 states in the Southeast are all coordinating this project. And it is very cool. I'm actually really excited. I get to go to London in May to meet with the Royal Horticultural Society about their citizen science projects about pollinators. So we're going to be sharing what we do and what they do and maybe come back with some cool notes. So we're very excited about that. And I love the census because it's something that wherever you're at in your journey, whether you're just learning about pollinators and gardening, or whether you're just learning about citizen science and the ecosystem, it's very accessible. So the first goal of the census is to create sustainable pollinator habitat. So by educating gardeners about plants that will provide nutrition for pollinators while surviving the drought, because the census is at the end of August, which is really tough on anybody's garden. So if there's something flowering at the end of August, you know it's a tough plant. But also, you want something that's performing well. The second goal is to increase entomological literacy of our citizens. So entomological literacy just means you notice bugs and other insects, and you can have some sort of kind of appreciation of them. A lot of folks don't recognize insects in their communities. So this is a moment where you do actually kind of have to say, oh, there is a lot of bees and wasps and beetles and flies around these plants. And then finally, to generate useful data about our pollinator populations. Because when you just stop and take a moment to look at plants, you can notice these changes. And we're also, as we gather more data, as we continue to participate in this project from year to year, in different organizations, and maybe yourself in your garden continue to do this year after year, you're going to be able to notice some trends and how different weather and other things impact native pollinators. And we have seen tons of benefits from this. So we support pollinators by educating folks and getting them engaged. And usually when people are engaged and educated, they have behavior changes, which is what we're about. Plant more gardens, spray less pesticides. We really love that. And citizen science not only gathers data, but also engages people in the scientific process. And that engagement makes people more engaged at other levels as well, which is really great. Not only with the education, we're engaging the community, and then there's community education, then you get this ripple effect of more and more people getting involved and getting educated and getting activated to look at, study, and plant plants for pollinators. And finally, it's an engaging activity, which is kind of funny because you're actually sitting there for 15 minutes just watching plants and pollinators, but it is engaging because, I don't know, I'm a very busy person. Sitting down for 15 minutes doing one thing can sometimes be like almost nearly impossible. So having to sit there for 15 minutes and go, look at that thing. Oh, and look at that one, and look at that one, and that one. It's almost a little bit like meditation. And you do just have to stop and sit there, and it is very engaging. And we've seen reports year after year after this has been done. People have self-reported that they feel calmer, they feel more engaged in pollinators, and they feel more aware. They start noticing things that they never would have noticed if they hadn't just sat there for 15 minutes. And in our busy society, I think we can all relate to that. So we do generate real data. There have been a handful of journal articles, studies, and publications done, and they are all available on the Great Southeast Pollinator website. Here's just a few here, and they were just looking at the economic impact of pollinators, the engagement of the community, and actually the self-reporting data that's coming out of just doing this program, which is really cool. The other thing I love about it is it's really simple. This is the data sheet. They've broken these down. These are all the different types of insects that you're looking at. So nothing too terribly, hopefully too terribly hard. We've got beautiful pictures. So even if you don't know something's a carpenter bee or a small bee, you can at least match the pictures and know what you need to know. So it's very simple to do. I will say it is only about insects. So some people are like, well, what about the hummingbirds? And I have to be, I do have my little Linicera sempervirens, my coral honeysuckle, which is, I haven't seen a hummingbird yet at the Pollinator Haven Garden, but I'm hoping. But we don't count hummingbirds, and sometimes people get a little hung up. They're like, but what about the hummingbirds? So we're only focusing on insects. And where do you do the census? Sometimes people get intimidated about where to do it. And it's really wherever there is a plant that's in flower that's got insects landing on it. It could be a weed in a parking lot if you so chose, which would actually be really cool because, I don't know, it'd be kind of cool to see how many times a little, dandelion got visited by some pollinators. But it does tend to be in gardens. So it can be in your backyard, a park, a botanical garden, on a nature trail, a planter in a city center. We've had different communities do different things, and all mixtures of that. We have had a few city parks do it at kind of more natural areas, and it's really cool. You also don't have to do it as part of an event. You can just do this, print it off the sheet, and do it in your backyard on your own or with your family or with a small group. It doesn't have to be part of this elaborate scheme. So like I said, you just download the sheet. It's available for free on the off of the Great Southeast Pollinator website. You find a plant that's got insects landing on it. You observe it for 15 minutes. Then you tally every single time you see a different type of pollinator landing on that plant, even if you know, or you think you know, it's the same insect. You still do it every time an insect lands. Then after that 15 minutes, you scan the QR code, or you can go back to your computer, upload your data to the Great Southeast Pollinator website, and then you're done. Or you can do it again and again and again. I think last year I did it like 4 times, and it's kind of cool. That's almost 2 hours of my time. So this is a data sheet that Charlotte Glenn, who's the state coordinator for the Master Gardener program, she did it on Vernonia lettermanii. It's a type of ironweed. And you can see it was very popular with the small bees and the wasps and the moths and butterflies in her yard. So it's really cool to start noticing these, what's called phenology, so you know when these plants are flowering. And then you also know which plants different pollinators prefer. And maybe you've noticed these things in your garden, like, oh, I've noticed the butterflies really like this plant, but not this plant. This is a cool way to record that data. If you have a very active plant, mountain mint in our garden is super, like there's everything on a mountain mint. It flies everywhere. There's no way to keep track of everything if you have a big mass of it. So you can look at just a little small spot, something that you can keep track of, and that's just fine. Really the purpose is to watch the same plant for 15 minutes. And like I said, you can do it as many times as you want. This is a summer camp that we did, and it wasn't on the census day, but they practiced, so that way when they went home, they could do the census at their own homes. And they practiced at the pollinator garden. So this is the website, Great Southeast Pollinator, or gsepc.org. If you search Great Southeast Pollinator Census into your search engine, this will pop right up. And there are so many resources on this page. Becky and the state team have been doing a really good job gathering resources. The census materials are available in Spanish, and we're trying to translate more and more of the educational resources into Spanish, so we're reaching a wider audience. There's something being added every year. We really try and target our teachers, so that way this can be used in a school garden situation. It's great for homeschoolers as well. There's lots of different programs that homeschoolers could utilize, homeschool groups. I was really excited that we added this pollinator journal last year. It's a really simple 10-page document, but you can download it for free. And it's a really cool thing to use in science programs, and it can be used at many different ages. It's not age targeted, so K through 12 is just fine. These are the old stickers, but we're coming out with a new sticker and certificate, and the stickers and the certificates will be available in North Carolina with all the branding. So if you do have a group that wants to have something to show off to say that they did the census, you could download this and show it off. I know everybody loves stickers. I'm a big sticker fan myself, so love getting a sticker when we count. So we've only participated in this program for 2 years. We did in 2023 and 2024. So how did North Carolina do? Small but mighty is what we did. So we saw an increase in number of counties that counted. We went from 66 to 78, including 20 new counties that didn't count in 2023. We had an increase of number of counts from 1,475 to 2,083, so almost an 800 count increase in 1 year, which is really cool. We counted 54,288 insects in 2023. We counted a whopping 89,246 insects in 2024. So my challenge to you is, let's count even more in 2025. The other thing that was really cool is we had counties from the mountain to the sea. Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3, rural, suburban, urban, everybody. It was not centered around the urban areas. In fact, we had a top 5 of participating counties. Transylvania County was 3rd in the state for number of participants. And Cabarrus and Cleveland, which are outside of Charlotte, also ranked pretty high. Forsyth and Durham County obviously are very urban areas, but Transylvania has really, they're doing some really cool stuff up there in the mountains. We had 31 counties that had more than 20 counters in the county, and 28 counties had 5 or less counts. But the county that, if you participate, your county gets counted, which I love to see. We had 132 events across North Carolina and 320.75 hours of Extension Master Gardener volunteer hours went towards promoting and offering programming around the census, which is really cool. And we had 38 unique events from the botanical gardens, schools, libraries, environmental organization, and municipal workers. There were several county governments, city governments that encouraged their workers during their workday to participate in this project, which was really cool to see. And I'd love to see more counties and governments do that. Again, it's only 15 minutes and then maybe another 5 or 10 minutes to participate, but every count counts, not to be really lame. And we also, remember, the first goal of the census was to create new pollinator gardens, and this year 80 new pollinator gardens were created, which is crazy, and they were from across the state again. Everything from Carteret to Transylvania, new gardens were built, which I love to hear. You know, every little bit helps. And what types of insects, what type of counts were made? So the type of insect with the highest count, as you kind of would expect, are moths and butterflies. People recognize those. A lot of times late August, the swallowtail butterflies are very active. The monarchs are very active. So people go, yes, I can see that, and I know that one. Bumblebees were the second highest with 14,602. And then small bees, wasps, and carpenter bees kind of were up there around the same kind of 10,000 range. And people, surprisingly, honeybees had the lowest count number of anything, which this data doesn't really tell us why that is, but I think it does demonstrate that we do have a diversity of native insects. They're very active, and they're even more active and important in some ways than honeybees on their own. So they deserve just as much recognition as our honeybees that they do. I will say the one big change, this actually looks very similar to the chart from 2023. The one big change is a switch between wasps and small bees. There were a lot more small bees that were noticed in 2023, and they were actually, I think there was about 2,000 more noticed in 2023. So I don't know what's going on with that, but that's why we collect data every year, so we can start to see these different trends through time and maybe start to make sense of what these populations are looking like. As a gardener, as a plant person, I do like to recognize kind of the top 10 plants that were observed. So across the state, Agastache, the hyssops. This is a picture of a Agastache blue boa. It's a beautiful plant, very popular with bumblebees and small bees. Then we've got buddleia, which are our butterfly bushes. The Joe Pye's, Eutrochium, Eupatorium. Definitely in August and September, you will see all the little bumblebees, not little, actually the big bumblebees, and the big swallowtails on them. Echinaceas, this is a new one to this year. It displaced a few things, but the coneflowers were very popular. And I will say, we didn't have coneflowers flowering in our garden in 2023 in August, but in 2024 we did. So I think that's really cool. Lantana was very popular, and if you have a lantana in your garden, you know it is a pollinator magnet. And a lot of people chose to use that during their census event. Mountain mint, this is a picture of the mountain mint Pycnanthemum albescens on this slide. It's one of my favorites, very showy and very, very fragrant, but also very popular with wasps and flies and small bees. So if you have any pest issues in your garden, wasps are a great native pest control, so plant some of this. Rudbeckia, which are Black-eyed Susans, as you would expect, those flowers throughout the summertime. Our sages, several different kinds of sages are available horticulturally, so everything, I feel like every one of them is flowering in August. They love our heat and humidity, and they come in all shapes and sizes and colors. Our onions and garlic, so there were some onions, ornamental onions that were flowering in August this year. I did have a few in the garden, surprisingly. Again, sometimes our gardens just change. The weather does things. Sometimes we have another rain. And then finally, zinnias. Zinnias tend to be really popular with the folks who participate in the census. And zinnias are not native, and they're annual plants, so you have to plant them every year. But man, they are pollinator magnets. If you do like to plant annuals, it's a good annual. So some things to take home with you if you want to participate and make your own garden. Honestly, if you've got some wild areas and you can just kind of reduce the management of them, that's a great idea. My little formula for management is mow in February, and then don't mow again till maybe May or July. Maybe May and July, but toss it up. Letting things get a little long will allow for some things to flower, and if things flower and can set fruit, then those plants reproduce, and you kind of get this increase. Also, there are probably wildflowers there that you may not even realize. So if you can let things get a little longer, you may notice that you already have some native plants and some native wildflowers that just needed you to be a little less maintenance heavy. And let those go. So think twice about the wilds of your spaces, because there are lots of insects like caterpillars, for example, that may be eating a certain type of host plant, or they may be going into a certain flower for a nectar source. But once they're trying to hide and pupate, they actually hide and look like some ugly plant. So this is a bank of weeds in a nursery that I used to manage. And one of the maintenance guys was like, "Hey, Amanda, I can just mow that down for you and spray that. You know, it's full of weeds." And I'm like, "No. Look." And he had not noticed that this was a host plant, or not a host plant, but this was a place where a ton of red admiral butterflies were pupating. So there were tons of these little rolled up leaves, and if he had mowed them down, there were hundreds of them. And then in a couple months, we had a huge cloud of red admiral butterflies in the pollinator garden nearby. So just by not weed whacking those, we suddenly had this big population boom, and it was awesome. I do also like to encourage folks to reduce mowing in their roadsides. They can be incredible places for wildflowers. This is an old lot that it no longer exists in Apex, North Carolina. It has since been bulldozed, and something's being built there. But I stopped for one day because I saw all these like different goldenrods, and I counted four species, and then probably like a dozen hybrid species of this goldenrod. And they were beautiful, and they were full of bees and wasps. So I just try to encourage people to look second time and just reduce their mowing and their spraying, and educate and communicate with your neighbors about what you're doing. What makes a flower pollinator friendly? Obviously some colorful petals, and different pollinators prefer different colors. There usually needs to be some sort of nectar and or pollen supply, because most of the time when animals are visiting these flowers, they are gathering something from it. Sometimes it's pollen, sometimes it's nectar, but it's not always the same, and different pollinators do different things. They also like things with lots of flowers, because if there's lots of flowers, it makes it very efficient for them. You know, it takes a lot of energy to fly around and collect things. So when there's lots of flowers clustered together, they're gonna get more bang for their buck, and so you're gonna get more bang for your buck, so to speak. So goldenrods, hyssops, Joe Pye weeds. Look at all those flowers that pollinator just has to land there and just hang out and eat, almost like an all-you-can-eat buffet. I did want to mention that the Perennial Plant of the Year, the Perennial Plant Association is an excellent industry organization. and they recognize a perennial plant every year. And this year it's Pycnanthum muticum, the smooth mountain mint, or clustered mountain mint is what they call it. And man, oh man, this flowers for 3 or 4 months out of the year. It smells amazing. And if you want to know what types of insect pollinators you have in your community, plant one of these, because everything shows up to eat some of this. And once they drink it, I have noticed they get a little, like they calm down a lot. We'll just put it that way. It is important to note that not all horticultural varieties are good for pollinators. A lot of the double-flowered things tend to have bred pollen or nectar out of the flowers and kind of favored more performance. So just be mindful that maybe it's pretty, but it may not be functional. And if you're trying to plant for functionality in your garden, just be mindful when you're at the nursery that you're recognizing that there are nectar and pollen sources in there, because that's what those insect pollinators are looking for. So you need to do a site assessment, wherever you're putting that, wherever you want to put that garden. And you need to choose what you're going to plant, whether you're going to do it from seed or plugs or do a cover crop. You do have to do weed control. We're in North Carolina. Everything loves to grow here. So you do have to kill the weeds or smother the weeds before you plant plants. And if you're going to plant in North Carolina, if you're going to plant seeds, February and March is a really great time to put down seed. If you plant it in the fall, it can be kind of good, but also the birds love to eat them. So what's really great about having to plant seeds in February and March is that gives you a whole year to control those weed seeds. So plan ahead. If you're planting plugs or trees or shrubs out of pots, August to October are a great planting time, and so is February to April. So we're still in that planting window. Go out and get you some beautiful perennials. Make sure that you are planting a diversity of things, because there are there's a whole season. Most of our pollinators start emerging in March, and they're here until it gets cold, which can be sometimes until November. So really try to have at least 3 different species in bloom each season during the growing season, and cluster them together. I have to say that I am guilty of the drifts of one. I used to manage a botanical garden who the director was known for his love of drifts of one, but really it makes a huge difference for pollinators. Again, they spend a lot of energy flying around, so when you can group things together, they're more likely going to stop and enjoy your garden with you. So plant big masses. Rethink your lawn. This is a turkey tangle frog fruit, one of my favorite plants to say. Philonodiflora. It's this little tiny ground cover. It's super cute, super cool, and it is a host plant for a couple of different butterflies, but it spreads very gently. You can mow it. It flowers its little head off, and it is a great alternative to lawn. But if you can leave your lawn a little longer and you're not having to manage for turf, there's lots of flowers that will emerge naturally, and you can kind of hinder your mowing or tune your mowing to their flowering. It's also okay to have blank areas. It's really hard to see in this picture. It looks a little better on my computer, and I realize, oh no, you can totally see it up there. Look at those cool holes. So this is a picture that I took at a local farm, and these ground nesting bees, which are the holes here, these ground nesting bees were like, hey, thanks for the blank spot. And so their nests are down in those holes. And sometimes you'll see these gathered together in areas where the turf isn't completely covering the ground. So that's okay to have some blank areas for some habitat. And if you want to keep it super simple, we have a really great list developed from the Great Southeast Pollinator Census. These are 20 plants that have been fairly reliable as flowering plants in the Southeast that are fairly reliable in late August. So you can plant a pollinator garden based on this list. We do have the Extension Gardener Plant Toolbox. I cannot stress this enough. This is a great resource that is attuned to North Carolina. There's lots of ways to search this, so you can search for plants that are appropriate for your growing conditions. And And here in North Carolina, we have an incredible green industry. There are so many amazing nurseries and garden centers here, especially in the Triangle. I have to say, I've traveled a lot of places in the world, and the gardens and nurseries in the Triangle are really, really special. So just know your source, research your nursery, inspect your plants for pests and diseases. Try to stay local, because in North Carolina we can do that and get some really cool stuff. And try to know the plant before you buy it. I will tell you, I have bought things that I had no idea what they were, but I wanted to try them anyways. In the last few minutes, I wanted to leave you with a few top tips and some things to try, some other projects to get involved with. I'm a huge proponent of citizen science, not only for adults and high school kids, but of children of all ages, all the way up. It's a great way to apply different scientific concepts in a real-world situation. So we do a lot of education around bees in extension. We have some great extension bee specialists in North Carolina. There aren't too many of those in the United States, so we're very fortunate to have quite a few of them here in North Carolina. And we have almost 560 species of bees in North Carolina, which is really amazing. And here's just a few. This slide is just a few from Dr. Elsa Youngstead, just showing the diversity of all types. And they live in a lot of different places. So they live in the soil, they live in wood, in stems, in cavities. And why this is important is we kind of focus a lot on honeybees, but really less than 1% of bee species live in cavities and in these large eusocial groups. 85% of them, 95% of them live in the soil, in wood or stems, in almost a solitary situation. So that's a whole different way of managing them, right? So in North Carolina, about 70% of the bee species in North Carolina are ground nesters. So leaving those bare patches is really important. Another 21% are cavity nester or stem nesters or cavity nesters. And that's where, when you're managing a pollinator garden, where you can really help them. So cavity nesters, they're looking for places, usually like old bee houses or bird houses or animal homes, things in the ground where they're kind of already pre-built and they just kind of tuck in there in these little balls. The ground nesters is where we really don't know a lot about them. So this is a picture of a lawn, probably from an extension agent. Usually in May, we get phone calls. Oh my God, my yard is full of yellow jackets, and it's usually ground nesting bees. And please, please, please identify insects before you spray them with insecticides. But these guys are so important. And so there are folks at Cornell University who are asking folks, if you have ground nesting bees or you think you have ground nesting bees, please tell them. You can go to gnb.org. This little QR code is a link to their iNaturalist project. So if you have iNaturalist on your phone, you can start taking pictures of these sites. And actually, if you really want a really cool project, especially for older kids, they have like a season-long sampling project that they would love more folks to participate in. It's based out of Cornell, which is in New York State, but they are looking for more folks across the country to better understand this group of insects, because really, we do not know a lot about them. And then here in North Carolina, we've been doing some research on stem and wood nesters. So there's the blue orchard bee is really popular, especially with our apple growers, and it's very popular out west, pollinating a lot of our agricultural crops out there. But here in North Carolina, we still have a diversity of them. 21% of our bee species are stem nesters, and they need holes and construction materials to build their nests. And really what we used to think is that, hey, you need to cut your stems back, or don't cut your stems back, or when do you cut your stems back? And so we did a citizen science project in our demonstration gardens and learned that there's lots of different insects that use our stems, but they don't use them at the times that we think, and we need those stems in the gardens longer than we thought. So we now have this research-based graphic that helps you understand when to prune your plants and when these bees are utilizing the stems. So the plants that are going to be used by pollinators this year were the stems that grew last year. I can't explain it any better than this, so take a picture of this, put it on your desktop, put it in your garden shed, and just remind yourself, don't prune your stems to the ground. Leave at least 18 inches and do that over the winter months, November to February. We're also learning about squash bees here in North Carolina. In Lee County, we are doing a squash bee study with Penn State University, and we were one of 6 sites across the country. And we sent in 17 bees that we collected from pumpkins, squash, and other gourds. And of those 17 bees, 16 of them were squash bees, the most of any other site. So we're really excited to be participating in that study again. We've also learned about how to build a better monarch garden. So the main findings from Drs. Adam Baker and Dan Potter at the University of Kentucky, if you're really into monarch butterflies, is to plant your milkweeds on the perimeter of your garden and kind of mulch around them. Make them this like one singular thing on the edge of your garden. Don't tuck them in with other things because the monarchs can't find them as efficiently. They're also more likely to visit your garden if they have access to the north side or the south side of your garden. So try and build it kind of out in the open rather than kind of tucked in anywhere. They also are not picky about cultivars and nativars. A lot of the nativars that are available for milkweeds are also preferred. Finally, the European paper wasp, they really want folks to be looking out for this. These will eat monarch caterpillars too effectively. So in urban areas, these are a huge issue in Kentucky. The way you know you have a European paper wasp is these guys have orange antennas. So if you're not sure if you have a European paper wasp, if you can catch it or kill it and then bring it into the extension offices, we can identify it for you. But these guys will eat monarch butterflies like potato chips. So it's really important to keep an eye out for these and control them in and around your garden. And also participate in Monarch Watch. This is a citizen science project that you can volunteer for. You can tag monarchs, you can just report a tag if you see it, or at least keep track of when the monarchs show up in your garden. We are, wrong slide. We are in the month of Earth Month, but we're also in NC Science Fest month. So if you want to get involved in the different science festivals here in North Carolina, I highly encourage you to check this out. There's lots of different things going on across the state. I will say in Lee County, we're going to be doing a star party this Friday. We're going to be focusing on nocturnal insects and lightning bugs. So we're very excited about that. If you see bumblebees, we need to track those. So you can track bumblebees. So there are lots of different ways to engage in citizen science, not just with a census, hopefully with the census, but just start observing what's going on in your garden. Observe what types of insects you're seeing in your garden and make changes how you manage your property in your garden so that you're encouraging these insects to have a safe space to gather resources and complete their life cycles, because it takes all of us doing our part to support them. And I hope to see you at a Great Southeast Pollinator Census event soon. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Incredible stuff, as always. Much appreciated. Great stuff. If you're here in the room with me, I see some folks upstairs. If you've got questions about anything you've seen or heard in the presentation, wave down at me. We can call on you and you can ask questions of Amanda. I also have questions that have come in on YouTube in the chat. So now that we've wrapped up the talk, if you've got questions, you can drop those in the chat, and I'll read those off as well so that we can have a great big conversation about, well, the stuff that you know a lot about, Amanda. So let me, I'll throw a couple from the chat for you first. The first one that came in, I don't know, this is a tough one.
Lay it on me, man.
How do you suggest convincing folks not to hire mosquito spraying services? Insecticides in your neighborhood? That's
a great question, and that probably is the best question to ask because the impacts of mosquito spraying, the pesticides that are applied to control mosquitoes do greatly negatively impact different insect populations, not just pollinators, but all insects. A lot of them are non-selective pesticides that are sprayed. And again, kind of going back to that graphic about, where are those insecticides landing and how are different organisms interacting with the residues of those. My angle is education. So first approach that person, especially if people are spraying their yards. Obviously, insecticides don't recognize property lines, and neither do insects. So, if you notice that someone is spraying insecticides or has a mosquito person coming and spraying their yard, be gentle and kind and ask, start asking and be curious about why they think they need to spray their yard for mosquitoes, and maybe educate them on the negative impacts of these insecticides on native pollinators. Most folks, I think, don't want to think that they're killing insects. They get very focused on, I'm killing mosquitoes because, I don't want to get an infectious disease. And sure, public health is a huge concern, especially after hurricanes. But at the same time, you have to balance that. And in a homeowner situation, there are some really great things that you can put on your body, dump out standing water. There's other things that we can do, especially in denser communities, about that. So kindness and education, I guess. Being a good neighbor. Maybe a free plant.
There you go. Free plants. Free plants.
I find giving away free plants really helps with a lot of things, actually.
So do you have a goal for this year's Great Pollinator Census?
Oh,
if you went from like 50,000 insects counted to almost 90,000 insects, are we trying to get like 200,000 insects this year?
It would be so cool to have 5,000 counts.
All 100 counties?
Yeah, all 100 counties and 5,000 counts. Like, man, that'd be so cool. But we've only got 22 counties that didn't participate, right? And yeah, if we had 5,000 counts and all 100 counties, it would be #success story in my book, for sure. So challenge everybody. If you're in like a really rural county, Jones County, Halifax County, come on. I know you got some really cool places. Jones County's got some really cool stuff out there. Some beautiful forests.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. We can get the word out. We'll get the word out. I'm gonna look around. Questions for Amanda? Wave down at me.
Hopefully people up there have some really, really cool pollinator gardens, or at least are inspired to plant some cool plants. There's some great nurseries near the Daily Planet Theater that you can check out after you leave here, and you can go home and plant you some new pollinator plants in your garden. Love
I gotta
that.
say, I'm already super excited for my pollinator garden, which is starting to come in. There's green poking up out of the ground for so many of the plants. And I was going through, I've got to get better about trimming my stems, though. I waited. It's been like, I trimmed them last week, left like 2 feet. Okay, that was good.
Yep,
I did
that's
okay.
great. Yep.
And then now the plants are already growing up past the stems that I cut, so it doesn't look bad.
Exactly. I think that's we get really, for some reason, I think it's our European, a lot of European influence. The Europeans got really big into like very tidy gardening. And so we feel like we have to do that. But the great thing about if you do leave the stems, in our garden, we trim them all at the same height. So it still looks uniform. If any stems are kind of laying down and looking kind of gnarly, we remove those. You don't have to leave everything. It can still look tidy and managed, but not clean. And so we cut everything at the same height. We remove any weird gnarly ones. And as long as you can do that as soon as possible, if you haven't done that in your garden, do it ASAP. But a lot of our cavity nesting stem nesting bees, they're emerging from February until May. So do it ASAP, but the best time is November to February. Because especially if we get a really warm February, a lot of those insects may emerge earlier. So having it done gets it ready. But you're right. As soon as the plants start coming up, their new foliage covers everything, and the old stems that are left over, they disintegrate naturally. I have areas where if a stem breaks or looks kind of gnarly, I just stack it and I keep it dry and tidy, like a little bee hotel, and the cycle continues. It's really great.
I'm excited for my mountain mint to come in too.
Yay!
It's my favorite as well. You had so many pictures and kept bringing it up, and it is the most fun plant to watch. It's so attractive to all of the pollinators.
That smell. I love it when people have never met a mountain mint before and then they see it. Like I have it at the extension office in Lee County, and I've planted it right by all the walkways. So usually if people have never been to the extension office and have never seen a mountain mint and they see all the wasps and things, they either they're scared of the wasp, like, oh my gosh, the wasp is going to sting me. And that is an educational opportunity to let folks know probably the wasp is not out to get you. It's probably a little bit, hungover from drinking nectar from the mountain mint because it's very, very pungent. But also it's a great pollinator plant because those wasps are also providing, they will also usually, they're predators as well, so they may be eating other pests and problems in your garden. So it's great to have them around. You're just providing a free drink for them, which I think is cool. And there's so many different types, like the mountain mint that we saw, the cluster to the smooth mountain mint. There's like 15 different species of them, and they all kind of do something different and flower at different times. We've got 7 species in Lee County, and it's just kind of cool to have them all sitting next to each other, and people go, those are all the same plant? It's very cool. Anyways, obviously I'm a little nerdy about them.
Very cool. Very cool. Go for it.
So I've seen over the years there has been a decline in pollinators from year to year. Is that still the continuing kind of outlook right now? Or what's being done to try to incorporate more pollinators?
So the question was, we've been hearing about declines in pollinator populations over the years. Is that continuing, and what's being done?
Hello? Okay, there we go. So yes, pollinator populations are declining. The Xerxes Society for Invertebrate Conservation just published a study that they did a meta-analysis and have noted that there's been more than 20% decrease in pollinator populations that are being tracked in scientific papers. So there is a measured decline over the last 20 years. And what was the 2 questions? What's being done? Oh, what is being done, and what was the other part? Yeah, so unfortunately there's lots of different causes to these declines, unfortunately. So habitat loss, development, any kind of, well, let's put it this way, land disturbance, whether that's agriculture, construction, mowing, all sorts of land disturbances result in habitat loss and loss of food, forage loss. Pesticide use, we have increased our pesticide use over the last 60 years way more than I think a lot of people realize. And a lot of times these pesticides may or may not be used in the most effective way, or even in a situation where they need to be used at all. And pesticide education is really becoming a big thing, more and more in education and industry. A lot of that comes through the EPA. There's a lot of federal studies that are done and different programs that try and curb and study pesticide use and pesticide registration to make sure that pesticides that are being developed by industry we understand the long-term effects of those. And then finally, just kind of the way that we go about our lives, that kind of that land disturbance is just really kind of negatively impactful, and kind of plant and insect blindness. I think a lot of people, if you say, don't hurt that flower, don't hurt that honeybee, they may not even realize that they have done anything. So just being more mindful of the ecosystems around us can help. But in terms of what's being done, kind of one of the reasons why I'm here and I really get behind the Great Southeast Pollinator Census is it's really up to each of us to make that mindful personal decision to have a pollinator garden or manage our properties or the properties that we are interacting with in a more ecologically positive way that encourages pollinator populations and other natural ecosystem services. That we reduce the pesticide use and educate our communities about when we need to use pesticides, because pesticides are a great tool in the toolbox when they're the tool that needs to be used. And then finally educate each other and make us aware that You know, we are part of nature. I'm not being hokey. I know it sounds a little hokey, but we are part of nature. But when we forget that, we do forget that everything that we do every day does make a difference, whether positive or negative, towards our how we go about our lives on this earth. So really that kind of like personal responsibility, community responsibility, and education, and making intentional, educated decisions. And part of what we do at Extension as an Extension agent is I love it when people come to my door and they ask these questions and want to be more informed. And I get to have this opportunity to educate folks about these different things that they can do in their lives and in their gardens, in the spaces that they exist, that can be positive. Yeah, so the question was, is there any legislation that's being done on behalf of pollinators? And probably the last piece of like governmental legislation that was probably the biggest thing was back during the Obama era. He recognized pollinator decline. There was a task force of different organizations and specialists at land-grant universities and government agencies that got together and pretty much codified, like, yes, like let's do an analysis of the science so far. What are the impacts? What can we do? And unfortunately, after he left office, I think the last time they met was 2016, prior to the first Trump administration. They haven't met since. The other kind of piece was the Endangered Species Act, trying to recognize different pollinator species as endangered. So there are, I need to check this. I know the last time I remember looking at this, there were 6 bumblebee species that were recognized as endangered, federally endangered. I think that there's interest in doing more. I know that there's been interest in making the monarch butterfly a federally listed species, and when something becomes an endangered species federally, there's lots of different regulations and money that becomes available when that species, in terms of the management and programs that are available to support it. But some of the recent stuff that's happening in the government, I know that gets a little dicey, and that may get slowed down. On the state level, I haven't really heard anything, and again, I think it goes back to education. There are things that can be done, and there are organizations that there are different state governments and municipal governments that have put things into effect. And there are organizations that like to connect people to educate them about different policy measures that can be enacted at a municipal, county, or state government level. The Xerxes Society for Invertebrate Conservation has a program called Bee City USA, and one piece of that program, it's a voluntary program, but its purpose is to try and help engage municipal governments, and they do have policy, they do have different policy measures that people can adapt for their governments and their landscape management, in hopes that kind of educating the public and codifying these different things in ordinance form can start making those local changes. That's so true. So this gentleman up here is telling me the story, and I think a lot of people can relate to that. You know, they may not be involved in their HOA or POA or their state or local government, and there can be so much positive change when we look to our local communities and engage with our local communities through education and outreach and engagement and action. And so, yeah, so being involved in your HOA, POA, community organizations can make a huge impact. And a lot of times, I did have a slide. I'm not calling out HOAs as a whole necessarily, but the current way that we build subdivisions and different developments, it does really negatively impact the local ecosystem. I know there's a lot of governments, city governments, county governments, the zoning and planning offices try to mitigate that through ordinances and other policy measures, but there is still some negative impacts in it, and then it becomes incumbent upon the people who move into those spaces to take ownership. And I think people forget that. They say, okay, I've moved into my home, I have to mow my yard, and then I'm done. And they forget that piece again, that they are interconnected with not just the neighbors that are beside them and across from them on the street, but everywhere, really within, a mile, 2 miles, 10 miles, 100 miles, we really are all interconnected. And so reminding yourself that, you need to be engaged in the management, not just the mowing and the blowing of your yard or hiring a service to mow and blow your street, but to think like what else uses that space? What pollinators, animals, plants can or should or maybe just would benefit from having some space in your space, so to speak. So yeah, get involved with your HOA, educate them. There are a lot of really bad policies, not like, quantifiably bad management practices. As an extension agent, I teach BMPs, best management practices, right? Research-based information. We know that there are some things that we do, they are quantifiably bad. That's not just Amanda going around, this is bad. It's quantifiably bad, and unfortunately, a lot of that's being perpetuated by HOAs and POAs. And there's a lot of power within HOAs and POAs. There's a lot of money that's spent on landscape maintenance, and so with money comes great responsibility, I'll say that. So if HOAs and POAs wanted their spaces managed a certain way, there are tons of landscape services that would say, okay, you want to leave the grass a little long in this space? Okay, let's talk about that. But you, as an HOA, a POA, a community, you set your community standards. You do set your community standards. So if you do know that you want to leave some spaces for nature, if you want to manage things in a different way, you have to be intentional about that and you have to be engaged in that. And we have resources to help you reach those goals. I always like to talk to people about intentionally making goals of what they're trying to accomplish with their spaces and step back and think intentionally about that. And Extension can help with that, and there's other organizations. So I encourage you to reach out to your Extension agent and other environmental organizations and keep this conversation going. And also do the census in your yard.
There it is. The last plug at the last minute. Amanda, thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks for having me. It's great being here.
Excellent talk. Thanks for sharing all of your knowledge and information. And thanks, everybody, for coming out to the museum today. Hope that you enjoy the rest of your visit here in downtown Raleigh at the North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences. Thanks for tuning in online as well. We will, of course, be back here again next Wednesday at noon for another edition of the Lunchtime Discovery Series. So make sure that you're signed up for the email newsletter at eenorthcarolina.org. We'll see you again soon. Bye, everybody.
Thanks for having me.